So welcome to this Tonisity webinar. We are welcoming today PJ Cohns, who is based in Spain, but is originally from the USA. PJ started his career in the swine industry in the USA. He has been focusing on breeding farms in Minnesota and Iowa. And after that, he has joined the well-known genetic company PIC. And he was their European Director of Technical Services, as well as Supply Chain Director and Global Animal Wellbeing Director. Today, PJ Cohns is leading Global Swine Solutions, which is a consulting company advising some of the largest pork producers in the world. He supervised production units for a total of 2 million sows in China, in Russia, Spain, Denmark, just to name a few. And it's our pleasure to welcome PJ Cohns to this webinar, where he will discuss about practical aspects of Gilt Management. PJ, welcome, it's up to you.
Okay, thank you very much, Matthew, and thanks everybody for taking time out from their day for this. We did this earlier today, ran right about an hour, so I'll move forward a little quicker because we had some really good questions. And like Matthew said, if you have some questions, feel free to ask. I'll take some breaks every now and then to take a drink of water. So any break is greatly appreciated. Yeah, so Gilt Management. I think this is a great subject. I always like talking about gilt production, no matter where I'm at. And I think as we go through this today, sorry about that. As we go through this today, you know, we'll be talking about a lot of things, but I think as I looked at this, as I look at the content, about maybe 5% are the things that we put in place when we started this journey of gilt development. So very small amount that we put in place that we're still doing exactly the same today. So over time, lots of hard work, lots of mistakes, and I'll talk about some of those mistakes, and really just moving along with this process are some of the things that we'll talk about today. And again, like I said, if you got any questions, please feel free. Matthew did a much better job than I would do talking about myself. I guess the bottom line is I'm a pig producer. I'm a pig farmer. That's all I know. So I was brought up, like Matthew said, through the production industry in the U.S. and the Midwest. Ran a large integrator there, and then went into PIC, where I kind of dipped my feet and the first thing into the international pig business. I knew nothing about it. And I'm still here today. Really like the European business and the Russian and Chinese business also. So it's been great. Still have our farm back in southern Iowa. That's actually the picture on the bottom's out of my former home's backyard. Typical of Iowa. There's soybeans, corn, and the wean to finish barn out there. So I'm not a veterinarian. I'm not a nutritionist. But again, I come from I guess from a standpoint of experience, and again, some of that's been good, some of that's not been too good, and we've learned along the way. As I say, I go to where the pigs are. A little bit of things going on back home in the States, but mostly deal a lot, like Matthew said, in Russia. In Russia, that's been about really some of the things we talk about today. A lot of emphasis on gilt management because we've done a lot of repopulations there. Europe, a lot of focus on PRRS mitigation strategies, day one pig care, and also gilts. And then, you know, China, we've got some things about China today. So China is really about, with really big companies there, building that industry back up. And you know, so we'll talk about, you know, the ASF mitigation, a lot of new builds going on there, and truck washes. So I am all over the world. Like I said, I go to where the pigs are. So today, some of the things we'll hit some talking points on. We'll talk about alleged eligibility, and I have no idea what that means. I do know what eligibility means, and then we'll talk about what makes the best gilt eligibility. Why are you so predictable? You know, I am, for some of you who know me, I've kind of got this thing being a little bit obsessive compulsive. I like predictability, and I like predictability in gilts because I think it sets the stage. So we'll talk about that. Give me space for 500, Alex. That's a terrible reference to a US game show, so I'm probably the only one who finds that amusing. But we'll talk about space. We'll talk about space for the animals. We'll talk about space for feeders, and then the next one down, water. Don't tell me, show me. So we'll talk about water space also, and the emphasis that we've put on that. Hold on one second. We will also, sorry about that, talk about the show me the magic. So that's part of this timeline, you know, so the timeline by genetics, whatever type of genetics you're working on, that timeline for gilt heat induction. And then we'll talk about colors, and some more colors. I think we'll see towards the end here. I really like gilt development units. You'll hear me refer to them as GDUs over and over again, but those gilt development units, very color coordinated. So that actually helps us in the management also. So there's 6 things here today that we'll be talking about. We'll kind of go in and out on these subjects here, but I think the main thing from this is each one of these little bubbles here, these 6 bubbles, we could talk about for hours at a time, days on end, weeks of training. So at the end of this, you know, I've got, you know, you have Matthew's email, my email. If you got deeper questions into some of these things, that's great, because we're just going to hit on some of the highlights of these. And we call these tight properties. I believe my colleagues back in the US would call these non-negotiables. So these are some of the things, again, you can read here, things like heat induction, organization, Boars. We'll go into those. I did not put selection in here. I started to work on that, but again, selection, I'll just briefly go over that. Selection of gilts is such another subject. I didn't even want to get us into that. So that's another subject for another day, but we'll talk a little bit. And so why does gilt development matter? I won't read off my slides, but this one I think is important. It establishes lifetime performance. So we know that. This is from my good friend and mentor, Jose Piva, in the States. But as we see this graph, we see when we start out gilts doing very well, they always do well. They continue to do well. So this is very important to us. And as we look at this graph, we can look at work done in Brazil. We can look at work done in Europe and Russia. We can lay our results over this and see very much similar things. Where we start out gilts, where we start out with high production, that continues for a lifetime. And that number, you know, is somewhere, well, I'd say really close to an extra 0.4 pigs wean for each parity, okay? So 0.4 pigs, that's big. And I think about my largest producer I work with. If we were to do that for 6 parities, that would be the equivalent of about 160,000 sow systems. So this is important. And again, as we state, once that gilt starts out good, she'll continue that trend in her lifetime. I think number one question I come into, some people on here probably ask me, what's the most important thing as far as gilt eligibility goes? And to start this predictability pattern of gilts. And that thing is body weight, okay? So regardless of genetics, this could be Danish genetics, this could be your European white line genetics, it's body weight. And I've got a number in there, and that number is I just tried to hit the middle there, okay? So that number might not correspond to your exact genetics, but I got it on there. But the main thing is it's body weight, number one, but that body weight also has to coincide with average daily gain. So we got to bring that average daily gain along. Exactly it's somewhere in the neighborhood of 700 to 720 kilograms per day, or grams, excuse me, that's not kilograms, grams per day, sorry, typo there. So as we bring that body weight, we need that average daily gain, 720 grams, somewhere in that neighborhood, to come along also, because it also ties into our gilt development space and our whole sow farm flow that brings along age. So those three things are extremely important. So again, the most important thing, body weight, but we bring that average daily gain along, and we also bring that age along for breeding on the second heat. So as I look at this graph, this is something I tried to challenge myself. I've been looking at this matrix, and as you look across the top, you've got your average daily gain in both pounds and kilograms there, and over to the left, you've got weeks, which normally in Gilt Management, I just use weeks, but I also have days in there. But I've been using this chart for roughly about 10 years now, so I almost know it by heart. But the one thing that I do know is that circle there, that's the sweet spot. So as we talk about Gilts needing to weigh 143, 145 kilograms, we also have to measure that out by the average daily gain that we need, again, in that 680, 720 gram range, and where we're going to breed at on the left as far as age. And we know if I can stick in between these red posts there and in this circle there, we've got something good going there. That's a good, again, from experience, that's a good average daily gain where we're going to get optimum performance, and that's a good age where we're going to get optimum performance. Saying that, I go back to my days in Midwest Iowa running a production system. It took us literally 3 to 4 years to get into this spot, because you have to work on things, obviously the genetic end of things, your management end of things, but also a real emphasis on nutrition there. The previous discussion this morning was very similar to my experiences basically everywhere. Gilts gain a lot of weight, so it's actually how to pull some of that weight off to make this. So this chart looks very simple, but this speaks volumes, okay, as far as hitting the sweet spot, again, of weight, of average daily gain, and when we want to breed the gilt. The other thing is, and I think it's our duty to really challenge our genetic provider to say, what is their recommendation? And, then we look at the realities of what goes on in our system. Recently, genetics in one of the system I was working with, they were recommending an older gilt, which I was okay with as long as we get the performance out of that. But that older gilt, I didn't want too heavy. So they're like, well, breed 34 weeks, and you can still hit that 140, 145 kilogram range. But when you do that, I do know that that's way less than 600 grams. So we can do that, but at what cost? And that cost is probably going to be production. So I knew in my head that got me out of my sweet spot that I knew about, and really having gilts not gain that much weight, not have as good average daily gain, is going to hurt us in the long run as far as production goes. Starting in the gilt development life, nursery, grower, GDU, whatever you have, we have the recommendations on space. So that's the physical space within the pen, okay? And you got it on there. You can see it both meters for us Europeans and the Americans. You got the feet squared there. Space is important, obviously, but also, and I've tried to put this on one page, we have the feeder space and we have the water space. And I think my colleagues from CP China are on here. They know when we go into our wean to finish barns that I didn't have a lot of experience in there. The first thing we did was we measured feeders, and we were measuring feeders to see, did we have 2.5 centimeters in the nursery phase and 5 centimeters later on? And just for easy math, 10 pigs per 38 centimeters on the feeder. So if we can hit that, if we have that, we know we have that feeder space in line. Next is water. And this has been the real, I won't say struggle, but I'll say one of the things that we've really focused on in the last 2 years is water and water palatability. So when we have those 10 pigs per feeder hole, 38 centimeters, we also have those 10 pigs per water source. And this is for any pig really, but this also stands for Gilts also. So that's fairly simple, because we know where we stretch that out, where we get to 15 pigs, where we get to 20 pigs, 25 pigs per water source, every time we see a decline in our results. So when we get that right, we come back right, because water drives feed. I mean, we've tried to do it the other way around. Let's let feed drive water. It does not work. So water drives feed. We want to have that right. In many SOPs, we talk about feeding gruel feed, so a mix of wet feed and dry feed. Just for my head, we'll say 70% water, 30% feed to the small pigs. So the thought is, should we also do that for the Gilts to get them along their way to stay in that sweet spot? And that's pretty highly recommended from my standpoint, and also probably from most genetic standpoints. So gruel feed. And again, I think the one of the things that as I look at our nursery or early wean to finish diets, we've spent a lot of time, a lot of money. In the US, it's very common to use bakery, vanilla, chocolate, and we'll also see that in Europe to stimulate appetites of those young pigs, to get them to feed. They're looking for palatability, and we've paid for that, and that's been a great thing. But we haven't done that so much with water. We've seen some crazy pHs. We've seen some high fecal coliforms and water samples. So now that we've started to look at that, and that's why I like products like Tonisity, and they've actually looked at palatability. Anything we can do to get Gilts on water is a good product in my estimation. Our goal is within 6 hours, 100% of the animals on water. And then if we can push that, we know within another 6 hours, we've got a really good chance of having 95 to 100% of the pigs on feed. So water, again, has been a big focus. One of the things is, and I've become really good at finding feeders. So this is a Eastern European Gilt development unit, where very, very classic European style feeders there on the right, with the red top. As we got into production, we knew we were about 4 centimeters, so we were real short on feeder space. So again, I think I've gotten really good at looking around farms and dumpsters everywhere I can to find feeders to put in there. So we found this feeder that put us at over 5 centimeters, and our results took off from that very point. It's that feeder on the left. Isn't the perfect feeder. It's not the one I would buy, but it's functional, and it got us to where we wanted to be. And you can see the picture there. I like that picture. Those Gilts look really good. The other thing is availability of water. A thing you'll see a lot is these water trees down at the bottom. This was the first water tree that I ever made myself and put in our wean to finish barns, because we knew we had to have water accessible for pigs. If we think about it, and it's not too hard to think about, in most farrowing houses, if we're lucky, we have a piglet nipple. Very rarely do we have a cup. So pigs are coming into these nurseries, they're coming into wean to finish GDUs. They don't know where the water's coming from, so we got to supply that readily. I tried to look for a video of water trees, and there's actually a really good video by the Tonisity people that just came out that shows pigs. They like these water trees, and that needs to be, whether it's a water tree or a cup, 10 centimeters for any pig, but especially Gilts. Again, our emphasis on waters brought us to many different types of water systems. The top left picture there is our Chinese style. This is a water pan. What I really like about this is when pigs enter, they see water, they go to water, and that's good for my aspect. We've had really good results from this. This is rather ingenuity driven here. After 5 weeks, that will pull up and that pan will become flush, so it doesn't become a kind of a hygiene issue there. But I really like that, gets pigs to water quickly. Bottom right picture was that same nursery I showed before. There's a cup there on the left, and on the right, nice pan for water. We do take some labor to clean it out, but again, pigs see that water, they go to the water. Picture on the bottom left there is my friends from Croatia, the Belje team. If you look at the far right, that was the original setup. We had what they call 2 nipples, but it's really just 1 for 60 pigs, okay? So about 4 years ago, started installing 6 more nipples. There's actually 8 nipples in this pen for gilts and the other pigs. This is internal flow. And again, we can look at when we did that and the results picked up. I like this picture top right because that is a brand new wean to finish unit that we opened up. We double stocked that wean to finish, and you can see those pigs, those kind of brown looking things. Those are actually flower holders that you would put on your house. Somebody had the idea because it had clips on it. Those would be really good for pigs to drink water, and it is awesome. Pigs, once we put those pigs in there, you can tell from this picture, we also put the Tonisity product in there. They go to that. They really like it. So again, we drive water. Last but not least, water again. So this is a internal replacement farm in China. If I see a good idea, I like it. I saw this, because how many times have we been in any system, any finisher, any sow farm, and look at the black pipes, look at the galvanized pipes, and think, I wonder what those pipes look like. And sometimes when we open those up, we don't like that answer. Here, somebody had the great idea to go to a clear pipe, and I just said, man, that's so simple and a nice addition there. So we can see the water, we can see if there's any issues. It's a nice nursery. I thought a great addition there. Lastly, this is my only part on selection, and it's not really selection, it's just talking about gilt growth and quality. But one of the things is plastic floors in that nursery phase. If you're going through a nursery and not a wean to finish, plastic floors are great. They're great for pigs. The thing with gilts is you want them for a maximum of 11 weeks. You can push that to 12. I wouldn't go much further than 12. When we see gilts kept on plastic floors for 13, 14, 15 weeks, because there might be flow. People say we're doing it for the right reason because we have flow. That's not normally good. I think in the Midwest, we'd call that soft toes. It creates soft pasterns, and what you get, and it's impossible to see on those pigs at that age, and it's really hard to see at selection, especially on slats, like we see above, is those toes, starting to curl. So if we see that, if you see that in younger parity animals, first thing I do is, okay, what's our length of time on our nursery floor there? And when we correct that, I'm not saying it goes away totally. There might be other factors like nutrition, but we do see an improvement there. So I guess the gold standard is there for gilts, 11 weeks on plastic flooring. Those toe issues, that doesn't kill animals. That doesn't cause mortality. That doesn't cause low farrowing rates. What that causes is us to remove them as a parity 1 or parity 2 or early. Anybody got any questions while I take a drink of water? Matthew?
Yes, I don't have any questions from the audience at the moment, so sorry for that.
Okay. Yeah, no problem. I'll keep going. So we have the magic timeline. So as I look at this simplistic thing here, again, I'm looking at 3 to 4 years of us really toying with this. When do we begin boar exposure? What gives us the best results? And obviously, you don't make that switch today and get your results tomorrow. So it's really taken us a while to get there. I'm using 25 weeks here because I'm thinking, you know, that's a good place to start. If your genetic provider says, well, we should begin boar exposure 27, 28 weeks, that's fine. That just moves this over a little more. The fundamentals stay the same. Selection before boar exposure, 3 weeks later after boar exposure, you're looking at 65 to 70% heats. 3 weeks later, when you're getting to breed them, your heat should be 85, 90% breeding on the second heat. So that's kind of how this thing runs. We have some people from China on the line. I don't want to confuse them, because when we do repopulations, we'll actually manipulate this a little bit. What we know, what Foxcroft taught us a long time ago with Gilts is, if you begin boar exposure later on, that's okay. You're going to see a quicker peak in the number of heats, okay? So if you have you want to start off running quickly with the number of heats, you might flex up a little bit to 27, 28. But otherwise, I'm just normally 25, 26 weeks give you a nice distribution of heats over time. Again, this might change with your genetics, but it doesn't change this. So I've got a question here from Chad. PJ, in your estimation, if a system double stocks a site and does it double the water access amount, how much impact do you have on average daily gain approximately? Chad, that's a great question, and something that we've looked at. It really determines how much you are neglecting the amount of water there. So in my own wean to finish barns, because we had to, you know, we would stock those pens at 160. We would make troughs, we would make our own nipples for them. It does have an impact, especially in double stock. And I think, I don't want to bring up bad subjects, but in the US, they might be triple stocking or going above that right now. So it does have an impact. I can tell you that in my own system, in our own systems that I've seen, where we limit water by 20%, we will see a 40-gram decrease in average daily gain. So I think there's some, you can probably Google that and get a lot more scientific data on that. But I do know, if you don't account for double stock in a commercial system, we're talking about Gilts here, but this is a good question. You know, you have to have some type of supplemental water in there. And again, the gruel feed. James has got a question. I've seen the same issues with toes when Gilts are left on wire floors too long. It really depends upon what type of floor. If you've got the tri-bar, there's a little bit more give there. So you're exactly right. You can see that. So the main thing is, you know, the best nurseries for Gilts that I've seen, and if I was to build them today, you know, that a concrete floor or somewhere concrete makes really good feet and really good Gilts. I hope I'll come back and forth to those. I'm not going to leave you out or anybody's question out. I like this because this is Dr. Kummer's graph. Dr. Kummer is a really smart guy, much smarter than me, repro guy. But his system here responds to that timeline. So it's good to see, okay, this system that he's describing is exactly what we see in the field and exactly what we're going after. And I think it's also important, especially as we talk about Gilts and nucleus level, especially. You know, that 90% range of Gilts coming in heat, that's really good. That's world class, because I think of that 90% range, when we get in there, again, the predictability aspect, we have, from my experience, 5% that we missed. It's just human nature. You're going to miss some. But also you have 5% of any population of Gilts that are acyclical or not very reproductive Gilts. So in a good, and when you're functioning at a high level in the GDU, you're actually working out those Gilts that you don't want to put back in the system. And if you're at 90%, you know, I will get asked, and I won't spend a whole lot of time on this. People will say, you know, should we use some hormones to stimulate that? If you're at 90%, you don't need to do that. You're you're doing good. You don't need to. If you're less than that, I don't know if you're going to hormone your way out of that. You need to look at some of the basics we'll talk about today. I got a question here from Simon. Where do you think the P2 needs to be at service? You're suggesting on the slide that Gilt should be served from 31 weeks. It's my belief that Gilt should have more exposure from 21 weeks. Okay, Matthew, Simon, I believe you're talking about P2 back fat level, correct? I think that's what he's talking about.
I believe so. Simon, can you just write yes, if that's the case?
Yes, I did just write it. Sorry.
Okay.
So we will discuss it later, I think.
Yeah, so Simon, that's a good question. I'm going to try to answer that in a little bit, okay? Make sure I answer it. Keep me honest here. The one thing, again, as we talk some basics here, boar power. We say, well, everybody's got boars. What I don't find a lot is, do we have the right boars and do we have the right number? So having that, especially, there's some people on the call now from Romania and from Spain, and heck, from anywhere really. We're going to get warm. Having the proper number of boars in the rotation for gilt development is critical. And it's something I would say, I don't know if we're too good at, to be honest with you. That number exactly, that's somewhere between 1 boar to 100 gilts. In the summer, I like to say 1 boar to 80 to 100. And what I mean by that is that, and I've made this mistake before by throwing that number out, showing back up to a GDU a few months later, and I'm like, why do we have so many boars? It's the number of gilts of heat acclimation age. So Simon, if you're doing 24 weeks of boar exposure, which is fine, you need to calculate roughly the average number of gilts from 24 probably to 30 weeks. That gives you your number divided by 100, and that's the number of boars you should have. Good active boars, a mix of boars between young and some old. One of the things that top left picture, so that's a producer in Europe where we've imported Mischan semen. So Mischan boars, if you can challenge your genetic provider, Mischan boars and gilt development make the job much easier. And I hate to overstate that, but when I know there's Mischan boars, I know, I'm not going to say my job is easier, but they work more. I don't know how much better to say it. They stink, they don't grow, they're easy to handle, they don't get lazy. They're just a good boar to have. So I've imported Mischan semen into Europe. Ask your genetic provider wherever you're at, South America or wherever. There's some rules to boars, and again, I think we sometimes miss this, but again, I go back to that number, 1 to 80 to 100 is ideal. Again, as we get into the warmer months, you look down, limit boar use to 1 hour maximum. Boars will tell us if you've got a heavy boar, he can't last an hour walking into a pen with 15 plus gilts. So a good boar rotation. Boars should be between a year, 2 years of age. The main thing is, as the bottom thing says, you have a replacement of boars coming. Don't get caught in there. If you're at a point in a GDU where you say we don't have enough boars or our boars are old and don't have a plan, you are way behind. And I have been there, and that takes a long time to get out of. So it's important to have the proper replacement of boars coming. The other thing is house boars away from gilts of induction age. So my favorite GDU system, well, they're all my favorite, but one that I've got in mind with this, because the health allows us to do it, is we have our boars for heat induction in with the pigs that weigh 7 kilograms that are 14 pounds. So they're as far away from the heat induction gilts as we can get them. And when we bring those boars to the gilts, the heat is much more intense. It makes our job easier when we can keep those boars away. If you can, and in a lot of places, You know, it is what it is. You just need to try to get them as far away as possible, again, to make that job easier. And then the number, and again, this is the gold standard, the Foxcroft rules. You know, if you have more than 15 gilts in a pen, you need to use 2 Boars. Boars, you need surface area contact with gilts, and you need to have Boars. When you get above 15, you just don't have enough. So 2 Boars in pens over 15. The staging method, so this would be if you have a GDU that's got a common alleyway with hog slot type bar fencing, you can put a Boar out in the alley and use that Boar when you move down to put in the next crate or the next pen and move the next Boar out. So you're kind of cycling those Boars, giving them rest while still giving good Boar exposure. So again, we call that the staging method. The other thing is when we talk about, you know, the number of heats and you know, we'll go, and it's never perfect. No GDU's perfect, but if we see our heats start to tail down a little bit, we get in that 80, 75, 78% heats by, you know, 6 weeks after we begin induction. One of the first things we look at, besides space, besides feeder, besides water space, how much time are we spending in the pen? The standard is 10 minutes per pen. And just like carpenters and woodworkers don't go to work without a saw or without a hammer, if I'm working in a GDU, we have to have, I like the stopwatch, a watch that keeps us in mind of where we're at. This is the picture's actually a training session. We don't normally run that many people. This is a training session where we're going over just that, 10 minutes in a pen. Sounds simple, but it's one of those things that sometimes gets neglected. Talk about alternatives. So this is something we talked about. I was with I was talking to a client in Russia last week, building a GDU, and we're looking at Boar system. So that's over to the right. I think that stands for Boar Exposure Area. So the one on the left, that's your typical GDU we'll find in China, Canada, Spain, wherever, where we bring the Boars to the gilts. That's a good system. That's 99% of what I work with. The Boar system is a little bit different philosophy where we bring the gilts to the Boar. So you can see those pens in there, put the Boars in there, bring the gilts. It works well. If somebody, and this was our conversation last week, if you're looking at, hey, we'd like to implement the Boar system or we need some help thinking through this, the main thing is how your barn flows. If you are inducing your gilts in a barn that's 200 meters away, 100 meters away, you know, we need to think about where we're going to place a Boar system, because there is nothing worse than, I've seen it, made the mistake, having a Boar system and trying to move a gilt in heat over 4 barns. So I'm just saying, learn from my mistakes. It works, no doubt, but you need to think through it. As with anything in pig production, excuse me one second. We've looked at something and we said, is there another way to do this? And one of those other ways is modified Boar China style, because this is what we've done in China. We've taken that Boar exposure area and put it in a regular pen, just like we have. So we would have our 4 pens that will be empty. We'll put our 4 Boars in who haven't seen each other in a while. They don't like each other too much. They're protected because there's crates there. The red is the crate around them. So when those Boars, especially if you can mix a couple young Boars with a couple older Boars, when you bring those gilts in, what you want to see is those Boars very active. They don't like each other. They've got pheromones going, and literally in this system, when we come inside the door, there's a great many of those gilts who come in, who stand right in before we even get them in the pen. This is a good system. Again, we call this a modified Boar system. Again, we're bringing the gilts to the Boar, but a little bit more efficiency in there as far as the system goes. I'm looking at your question there, Simon. So I think I agree with your 10-minute observation per pen, but the time of day is also important. So Simon, I've got 2 for you that I'm going to put off and make sure I get done. I'm actually going to write it down. Make sure. I think I'm going to try to answer that. So we moved from the heat induction standpoint to the body weight standpoint. And this is where, again, predictability comes in line. So it's in really 3 steps. And again, I didn't correct the typo. Step 1, that's weigh on the second heat. And I'm not suggesting weigh every animal on a scale, but what a lot of the people I work with do is they use a weigh tape. Every now and then they'll use a scale to make sure we're accurate there, but use a weigh tape to make sure that we're in line. So not only are we on our second heat, but we're in that area that our genetic supplier wants us to be. If it's 145 kilograms, like this weight, the green will indicate, we know we're right. This is a good friend of mine, Jan Welvaarts in the Netherlands. He taught me not only do we need to look at weight, and I'm not suggesting this, but this is how much he does it. We need to look at weight at breeding, mid-gestation, and at farrowing to make sure we're on point. I'm just saying 1 step, make sure they weigh the correct amount. And those weigh tapes work really well. The second point is, and this is one that we look at body condition. So Simon, I'll try to answer your question here. We look at body condition at 4 times. Breeding, 30 days, 60, and 90. And how we do that, I tried to represent it in a terrible picture there, but that's that picture below step number 2. So we call it the 3-point method. There's various ways to do body condition. The one that I've kind of settled on really the last long period of time is because it's accurate. We can teach it in a commercial setting, and we can continue to, multi-generational, it stays in, is we look at the rib coverage, the fat over the ribs there. We look at the H-bone, and so the top there, like a dairy Holstein, that top circle, and on the back, the pin bone. And when we can feel for fat cover there, and the colleagues from China will tell you we can do this quickly, doesn't take a lot of time. We can tell on a score of 1 thin, 2 ideal, and 3 heavy where we are. And again, we look at that 3-point at those various times because a lot's happening here. Number 1, we've got cost. We don't, and this is something, my mistake back in the day was when we got the magic timeline in place, when we got the Gilts, average daily gain, all that right, we forgot about them in gestation and they got huge on us. So we knew we were losing money and we were losing performance. So we started looking at this. So that 3-point method, if anybody's got a question, got SOP on that, it works really well. The thing on top that I'm using there is a caliper. So that caliper is made as I don't know what the best word to say it is. As we're training, we're just checking ourselves out to make sure we're right. So that's what I'm doing there. That caliber is made 1, 2, 3, so we know where we're at. And then the third thing is a gilt comes into farrowing. And again, our goal is 80% gilts, 80% sows coming into farrowing in ideal condition. And what I'm thinking of, and the RSOP is a condition score 2. So when she comes in like that, same gilt down below, 17 pigs, wean 16 pigs, we have that happening. Because we build that predictability in, again, I hate this be predictable with my saying predictability, but that sow is a metabolic machine when she's in ideal condition. Excuse me, gilt, also sow. She comes in, she eats feed at a high level because we want maximum lactation. She has pigs easily. She doesn't have a lot of fat cover around her pelvis. She passes pigs easily, farrows in a short amount of time, milks very highly, raises her pigs, and then at time of weaning, she weans, and very consistently, somewhere between 4.7 and 5.2 days, she breeds again, and then we continue that cycle on. So that's where I'm getting at with the predictability. We have a lot going on, making sure that our growth through the nursery phase is all right at breeding, and then through gestation, that work will pay off. I've seen it over and over again. So Simon, coming back to your, excuse me, I can't do that. Coming back to your question about the P2. So the thing about P2 back fat, if you can do that on your farm, that is great. If you can do that in your system, that's great. But most of the time in commercial settings, when you think of, 3,000 sow farms, 5,000 sow farms in Russia, we're building 15,000 sow farms. How commercially applicable is it to do that? Especially if you talk 20% turnover employees. So P2 back fat is a great way to do it if you're accurate and you have somebody highly trained. There's a little bit less variability in the 3-point score, and making sure this predictability runs through. If we can do this, I'm not saying you shouldn't do P2 back fat, but we can get going without it. If you could do it, fine, that's great. That's a great step. But if you have this in, you can move along. Yeah, you got spot checks, exactly, and that's what we use that caliper for above. So if you have the back fat, and we do that, especially the nucleus level at farrowing and coming out of farrowing, that's a good thing to check to make sure you're right. And we have some other tools as far as condition goes, so we can watch that condition of each individual sow group, a portion of those, to make sure we're right. Caesar, my friend from Romania, has a question. Have you made any study about what does it mean translated into the number of total born alive piglets and incorrect exposure of gilts to boars when they are inseminated for the first time? You made it. Caesar, let me try to think on that. I'll come back to you on that. I need to think on that to make sure I understand what you're saying there. Going back to condition score, I like this slide because this slide, first of all, PIC trial data and trial data out of my friends at Belje in Croatia. This was a large trial we did to see, number one, how did our 1 to 3 body condition score go? And what do the pigs look like? And I think this trial has 90 slides in it. So if you want to look at it, it goes deep into detail. This just tells us some things we kind of know, okay? Number one, the ones. So the one on the left, the one that would be thin sows. They're pigs, lighter pigs, okay? Makes sense. If you look on the right, we've always kind of thought, at least I did, those heavy sows, we're going to have bigger pigs. And in this trial, what I'm consistently seeing globally is those big sows don't have as big pigs as the ones who are in good condition, and this proved it. Our good condition sows have good pigs. So again, the other thing about those heavy sows, those condition score 3s, and again, I have no science to base this on. All I got is what I see on a daily basis is those heavy sows have more variation in pigs. So you might have the 2 kilogram pig and you might have a 700 kilogram pig. So that's my observation. But again, I consistently see this. The other thing about this slide is there's some really smart people on this call. There's some really smart people in our business. But when I look at a condition score 3, sour, gilt, and when I look at a condition score 1, what's that sow going to do next time? And nobody with a high degree of success can say what exactly is going to happen. You could say it's not going to be good and be very accurate, but the predictability of a 1 and a 3, I don't know myself. What I do know is when we have 80% condition score 2 gilts and sows going into farrowing, we have good things happening. So that's why I'm in a rush. When I go to a farm, it's always on an agenda. Let's look at body condition. So a few things in here, again, we've gone over some of this. You know, this has got the total feed amount from breeding to farrowing. So again, you kind of got that in line. We're controlling condition, the percentage of feed fed that last 90 days, that's 30%. The weight gain, again, I've learned this from my friends in the Netherlands. Really look at that, and that weight gain, again, dependent upon genetics, but I'm taking a swing here. That's somewhere in that 56 kilograms. So that's gain on gilts from the time you breed her to the time she farrows. And then again, you can do the math to look at what we want to target weight going in. And I don't think you have to do this to every sow, but it's good to have an understanding. The one part here is, and I don't want to say it's controversial because I don't think it is anymore. My colleague, nutritionist Mauricio Conclaves in South America, former PIC guy, talked about this last week. A heavy condition gilt, and you could say sow, but let's just talk about gilts here. A heavy condition gilt, we do not need to increase her feed at 90 days. And I say that confidently. You can do it. But the only thing that you're going to accomplish is wasting some time, some money, and probably decreasing production. So those heavy gilts, the increasing feed, or what we call in some parts of the world bump feeding, I'm confident we see globally, we don't see any change in that. We don't see a change in the quality of pigs. We've looked at this for quite some time. So bump feeding, and I'm not saying you go out of this and do that at your farm, but I think if you are increasing feed, especially on heavy animals, heavy gilts, I think it's something to talk about, because again, we consistently don't see any benefit out of doing that. This is another, just the 6 pillars, and this just talks about some of the things, again, that full feed, birth to breed. And like we talked about in the earlier conversation, 80% of the time when we started to walk through this in the US, South America, in Europe, 80% of the time the gilts, when we have them on full feed, gain too much weight. So that's a point where the nutrition group becomes your best friend, because we'll say we need to turn that diet down. You do not want to take those animals off feed to make the weight. That's a terrible, terrible mistake that I've made, and I don't do it anymore. We get that diet right. We talked about the body weight, the average daily gain, immunity level. This is just kind of a standard in there, 3 weeks from the last vaccination. I would highly encourage you to talk to your veterinary group about that. But normally you try to get away from any vaccine. And we briefly talked about the feet and leg and the age. So those things in there are fairly important. This is kind of a good graph. Took me a while to figure it out, so I'll walk through it. But this is looking at gilts bred at 240 days. So we would say 34 weeks, 240 days. We're making the assumption that if you're breeding at 240 days, those gilts are heavy. And if you look at the bottom part of the graph there, the percentages. So if you look at the 50%, so if what this is saying is if we breed 50% of our gilts at or older than 240 days, assuming those are heavy, we see a definite decrease every time in the number of total born. And the other thing is, like clockwork, we see the wean to service interval on those animals goes up. This, ladies and gentlemen, is what we call P2 dip, okay? And this is very predictable. A heavy gilt, and you could say sow, goes into farrowing, and what happens? They don't eat, they have trouble farrowing. If I didn't say they don't eat, they lose body mass. And sometimes that condition score, that heavy condition score sow comes out of farrowing looking fine, but she lost a lot of body mass in there and she's not going to come into heat. This is our P2 dip. So, you know, again, the reason why not to get too heavy on those, and that percentage will move your wean to service interval up, and your litter size down. And again, we call that our P2 dip. Many places I'll go into and they'll say, well, I like to breed my gilts heavier, or my genetic supplier says breed them heavier. And that's okay. That's cool. That's cool. But it also comes at a price, literally. And when we look at that price, looking just at the cost of the gilt, the additional housing and depreciation, whether it's euro, I don't have euro or dollar, just for my simple mind, that's going to be about 0.40 euro cent or 40 cents per pig. So that's a pretty big cost. So if you're going to breed heavier, and in some cases you will, you got to get something out of that. The difference between breeding on the second heat and the third heat, we actually, looking at this over a long period of time, we actually get more total born breeding on the third heat. But in a lot of places, and you can do this in your own system with this cost calculator, we don't cover the cost of keeping them that 3 weeks. So if you're going to do it, that's fine, but it comes at a cost. And this is a well-used slide that just shows in the US what we consistently see. And in this case, this was just done better than what I have done in the field. When we increase feed by 1.8 kilograms to the gilts before breeding, we get a pig. And we see we see at least a pig when we go from what I would call limited feed situations to truly full feed situations. So full feed, birth to breed. And full feed means full feed. So this is the same farm. And everywhere I go, everybody's on full feed. But you got to really look at it. And this is one that is extremely hard to manage. And this takes some skill and some training. But honestly, the one on the left, that's full feed. The one on the right, that's not full feed. So if we have more of those on the right than the left, we're going to see a dramatic decrease in production. So really pushing the feed to gilts before we breed. We all say it, but are we doing it? And this again comes back to an old slide that, not too old, I did this in roadshows not too long ago, but we will continue to see this in the commercial world. So what this tells us is, if you look at the far left, so what this is indicating is the days in a stall or in a crate before we breed them. So walking through this, if I find a gilt in heat, second heat, move her into a crate and breed her immediately, that's the far left. That's kind of our benchmark. If I find that same gilt in heat, hypothetically, move her to a crate and leave her there on full feed, like the picture on the left, for 16 days, we get back to our benchmark, okay, as far as pigs born alive. If we move that same gilt and don't breed her for 3 to 4 days, we're going to lose a pig of born alive. So I think this is important as we get, and most systems utilize a pen and a crate situation. That's fine. The timing in that crate is critical, okay? We used to call this incorrectly crate breaking. Somebody pointed out to me, again, Jose Piva pointed out to me, it's not crate breaking, it's feed disruption. So as we move that gilt perfectly good heat into a crate, she's there, all these hormones kicking in, and then we disrupt her feed flow because she's not used to this feed falling in front of her. We do irreparable harm to her performance. So I think this is pretty important. And again, where we get this right, good things happen. I'm going to move quickly. Simon, I believe this comes back to your question. Is gilt development a dedicated task? Or is it done at the end of the day? Believe me, I've been in that situation before where, the gilt development on a Saturday afternoon looks a lot different than what I do on a Monday. So do we dedicate that task? Do we have dedicated personnel to do that where we aren't rushed, where we can do things correctly, and that's pretty important. We do know, we've looked at this extensively based upon sow farm size. 6,000 sow farm, you'll need 6 hours of man hours to complete that when you think of everything that's in there. ESF, totally another subject. You'll need basically double that to 5 more hours per day because of the gilt training. ESF works very well because there you definitely take out some of the guesswork of condition, but the fact is, in the training period, it takes time. So labor allocation, do we have the labor allocated to this lifeblood of our farms, to the 20 to 25% of our production? That's the main driver. The other thing is, I think it's a terrible analogy, but I use it anyway. I look at gilts as I look at a car. If we were to buy a car today, drive it a kilometer, a mile down the road, park it, and try to sell it, we are going to lose a lot of money doing that. I think of it the same way when I go to a farm and if I can see a cull load going out, or I can look on their performance data and I see gilts or P1s or P2s being culled, we've basically bought that car and sold it right off the car lot, and we lose a lot of money. Most systems, we need at least a P3 to get that depreciation back. So the goal there, and this hasn't changed, is 75% of our animals make it to P3. The question was asked earlier, okay, if you have a bad animal, a bad early parity, do you want to keep it around? The answer is, that's a good question, no. But you don't want that to get more than 25%. If you do that, your herd's going to get old. So one of the things is measuring retention, and most AgriSoft, Pig Champs, those nowadays, Meta Farms does a really good job, will keep your retention rates in. And again, I just put the performance. This might change by genetic, and it should. The main thing is on this, 3 years ago, I think we were talking about 14, 13, and 12. 14 total born, 13 born alive, and 12 weaned. Short time later, we're over 16 now, and I fully expect us to keep pushing this, to keep pushing every year. So the emphasis on gilts, I hope I continue to learn, and I hope we continue to put emphasis here, because most of our objectives, and I'm not saying we're making that everywhere. No, we're not. But we keep our eye on that, and that's where we want to go. Last part, again, running a little bit behind here, is tools. This is one of the things when we first started doing this a long time ago. Some of the tools that we had in place we're still using today, from the tracking aspect, from the feed aspect. We have those in place. They're simple. They still work to this day. One of the things that I wanted to share, because this is the thing that we put in place, and it's multi-generational. This has been running on a whole lot of sows throughout the world, is this 3-tag system, red, green, blue. So this allows us, because everything's in 3 weeks, this allows us to be very visual, and this allows us to be organized around our number of heats, and also how we organize, how we manage or service that farm. And just as a quick example here, this would be a gilt. I got this at Good, bred on green week 41, found in heat green week 35 and 38. And literally, in the systems I work in, we put this button in their ear because that tells us a story. And here, this story is, I want to know what our thought was. If there's one gilt bred like this out of 100, I don't waste my time. But if I see quite a few of these, we need to know why, because remember, it's 40 US dollar cent to keep that gilt an extra 3 weeks. So as long as the technician or the farm manager would say something like, we had enough heats, we wanted to roll these down into week 41, that's good thinking. That's where that justifies. So the color coding makes sense to me. This, I would say, is a great situation. I'm assuming this gilt weighs 145 kilograms. We found her at green week 35, bred her 3 weeks later. This is a good situation. This is this gilt, and the one before, as a matter of fact, are starting that predictability cycle going. So this is great. We bred her 3 weeks later, 145 kilograms. This is going to be a very good gilt. And as I go through, nothing's perfect. You know, in this system, this is where I really stop. You know, even if I see one of these, because I got 2 different colors and they're off by the 3 weeks and bred. So this would cause me to say, you know, if I see more than one of these, the colors don't match, I'm going to stop and I'm going to say, okay, what do we got going on here? So again, this is the button system, the 3-button system, red, green, blue. I just like it. It works really well. And this also, I didn't say this earlier, this also ties into the breed week on the sow farm. So if you're got a dedicated sow field, they want to know how many blue, they don't really, my sow farms now don't ask what week, they say how many blue heats do you have? And we know what that means, so it helps them with breed target. The other thing, acclimatization. So we know more gilt litters can cause us more issues. I think Albert Vidal's on the line. We have an expert on here who knows more about gilt acclimatization than me, but I'm going to be very basic here and give one tool. Nursery average daily gain mortality on gilt litters can be a little bit more of a challenge. We know that. So the immunity, the acclimatization, we really need to focus on that. One tool, and I have this is from a slide I shared with the Romanian Vet Association. I have to be very careful, I'm not a vet. But one tool we use is feedback. We see feedback in the US extensively. We don't see it so much in Europe, and there might be some laws around that, but anyway, I don't quite understand those. What I do understand is feedback works. We are acclimating our gilts to the bugs that are on the farm. We do that in this concentrated way. That bag on the left holds 12 weeks worth of feedbacks for the entire sow system, 3,500 sows. So this is just one tool. I'm not telling anybody to do that, but I think if you're talking to your vet, you talk about something like feedback as a potential tool to help with acclimatization. Again, running out of time here, just to kind of summarize, birth to breed, full feed, 16 days prior to feeding, especially in a crate, flush them. Don't cut back feed. Aggressively find that sweet spot. It took me 3 years. We haven't changed that in a long time, where that average daily gain weight and age are. If you're not there, become really good friends with your nutrition group to get there. And once you get there, stay there. Feeder and water space, water accessibility and palatability. Those are two things, that go hand in hand. Your timeline, if you have it, stick to it. If you don't, work towards it. Boars, don't discount the right number of boars. Control gilt weight and gestation. Again, the goal, 80% of that group going into family in ideal condition. If you want a tool that we use to track that, feel free to look me up on my email. Organization, and I think finally, as we talk about gilts, it's not the SOP. A lot of what we talk about is the same. We've been talking about these same things. I mean, if I look at some of the things I talked about today, George Foxcroft was talking about them in the 1980s. So these things are in place. It's who can execute that every day. And again, we have our non-negotiables. We got our type properties. Gilt management is right there with day one pig care, heat check, and biosecurity. Those are things that we need to do perfectly every day. Other things, honestly, we can be average at, but this is the one we want to execute, because when people say, hey, I see this group that you work with, with this insanely high total borns and their gilt performance, the biggest thing is they have the same SOP as you got. They're just perfecting it. So that's a big thing. Simon's got a question here. A good way to look at lifetime performance of each breeding female is to look at performance by parity. Those gilts serving too young are often on catch up until parity 3 or 4. You're exactly right. And I think your statement there mirrors one of those first graphs I showed you. If we start her out low it takes her a while to catch up, you know, so you're exactly right. So why not start them out high? Simon's got another, a few of my larger farms are now seeing sows on heat in day 3 from weeding. Typically 30% of their sows on day 3. So Simon, that's a question I would like to talk with you offline about. There's my excuse me, I'm looking right at it. My email. Everybody feel free to email me, Simon. We can talk about that. That's a subject that I'm seeing more of, and that's much too difficult for me just to throw out something here. I need to kind of talk through that with you. So feel free. My email there. Anybody who's got WeChat, there's my WeChat ID. I'm trying my barcode out. Tiger from China, let me know if that works. That's all I got. I'd like to thank you guys. Yeah, any questions, please let me know. If you think of something when you're riding home or if you're at home, feel free, again, talk to myself or Matthew by email. That's all I have.
Thank you,
Matthew, you're up.
Thank you very much. Just one question from my side. So there was recently some studies showing that the age at puberty could influence the colostrum production and the quantity of colostrum that is available for the piglets. Do you have any information on this?
Yeah, so that's interesting because this was a study done in the States, NC State. Very interesting because as I started to read this, you know, I was like, uh-oh, because it's actually those younger puberty females will have more live-born, they'll have more pigs wean, because and the more pigs wean is a component of they're producing more colostrum. And that study showed that. And not only are they producing the colostrum, but they're transferring that to the pigs. So that's a very good question, a very good study. Again, what Matthew was talking about is this study showed kind of what we're talking about today. It goes hand in hand. Those younger gilts that are coming into heat younger are producing a higher level of colostrum and weaning more pigs. So to me, that's good news. Again, going back to my genetic supplier days, it was, you know, not only are we, you know, talking about breeding gilts earlier, but can we tie that in with those gilts, those now parity one's ability to raise those pigs? So I think this study kind of brings those things hand in hand. So that was good. I was glad to see that. But I think more work will be done on that on a larger scale. Good point. That's a good study.
Thank you, PJ. I don't see any other questions. So if anybody has, oh yes, there is a question. Maybe you can read it by yourself.
So this is from Jane Jordan. Surely the crux of good management is gaining good control of body condition, ensuring they are provided with the correct nutrition to optimize growth to maturity, but not to promote obesity. Sharp fluctuations in body weight will not benefit reproductive performance. Yes, that's you know, you're exactly right. And again, I think I go back to when we really started this. You know, we would work in this one area, we would work on the growth area, we would work on getting them through the breeding, and then, like I said, we literally forgot about them in gestation because we didn't see the results we want. And then we're like, my God, look at how big these gilts are. So once we started getting that together, like you said, good control. Again, we're controlling that all the way through her life. When we breed her, we're looking at that weight 30, 60, 90 days. So like you're saying, we are looking at that. And those fluctuations, you know, we want to have those fluctuations out. And that bell-shaped curve being just that, 80% going in, the other 10 we'll let happen. Because again, when we have that 80%, most of the comments from the producers I'm with are, you know, We have more pigs than teats. We need help with this. And to me, that's a great subject to jump into. But that's a good point. Thank you.
Okay. I think we will finish this session here. I just want to inform everybody that we are planning to have more webinars with the help of PJ, because he's bringing a lot of experience and practical aspects. That's what we need. So thank you very much, PJ, for your presentation, and we look forward to the next webinar with you. Thank you.
Yeah, and I'll save me a phone call. Caesar, I'll talk to you in a little bit. Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you.